Hey guys, Shadarek here with a video on Devourer feedback for Midnight Beta. I will be making one for Havoc as well, but starting with the Devourer one, and the Havoc one will be coming soon. I have a lot of thoughts on both specs, but Devourer just seems like the more important one for things to get changed on, as I feel like it needs a larger amount of more significant changes, and there are some issues that I definitely want to address with it. So, I do have my notes are going to be on the screen as well, as I'm going to be talking through a lot of different points, and it'll make it a little bit easier to follow along. So, the first thing that I want to start with is haste and mastery value is just way too high for Devourer. For reference, these are well over double the value of critical strike and versatility. Versatility is kind of always the baseline stat, where every other stat should be better than it. That's just a simple fact of the design. Versatility is supposed to be tuned the worst. It gives you defensive value as well, and every other stat should be better than it. But over twice as good is way too big of a gap. Havoc is nowhere close to that when it comes to critical strike and mastery compared to versatility and haste. And this is the most out of line stat I have seen since Augmentation Evoker released, where they would only stack mastery because shifting sands was the only thing that mattered. Um, that said, haste also makes the spec actually feel good to play, so that's a problem in and of itself. If you don't have haste when you're playing Devourer, the spec feels pretty awful. It's very important for both getting into Void Metamorphosis faster and for maintaining it for longer periods of time, which is also exactly how your mastery works. Your mastery, while being a flat amount of cosmic damage increase, you could see I'm currently in my converted character in, like max mythic rating gear, and sitting on my mastery, I have 48% bonus cosmic damage. However, it is increased by an additional 81% in Void Metamorphosis. So in Void Meta, it doesn't go from 48% to 81%, it goes from 48% to 129% damage increase. Personally, I think when they changed the mastery, they made the scale way too hard. This is probably something they're already looking at pulling back on, but I really don't think that it should be so heavily weighted towards Void Metamorphosis, and it should not be tuned twice as good as versatility, even more than that. I'm saying twice as good, but it is leaps and bounds better. It might actually be 3 to 4 times better until you get a very large amount. I believe it might have been the end sims where mastery and haste were still over double the value. I have some thoughts on how to address that, but the simple one for mastery is, I mean, it's tuned a little too high regardless, but it increases far too much in that Void Metamorphosis window. It should not be increasing by whatever it is. I think it's somewhere in the range of, uh, it's like 175% bonus while you're in Void Meta. Um, that should probably be cut down to at most double, and even that I think is a bit high. So I would like to see some change to the mastery, and in turn, that would lower the value of haste because your uptime of void meta drops pretty drastically based off of how much haste you have. That's also going to hit the value of mastery, and they scale off each other. Next is the spec is too punishing in cooldowns. Wild Devourer is a very simple spec, and I know people are going to be like, Lamau, 3-button spec. And you're not wrong. It is fundamentally a very easy spec to understand and play. It is one of the most punishing specs for misplay. Any GCD that you lose, or even partial GCDs in Void Meta, has massive recurring effects on your gameplay, and if you are making micro mistakes, that can cause you to lose an entire collapsing star or multiple seconds in Void Meta, where you're losing out on that increased mastery value, you're losing out on the haste scaling from emptiness, which is our talent down here. And the collapsing stars, each one is significantly more important due to impending apocalypse, which is an extra 30% damage per collapsing star. And the spell coefficient on that spell is crazy. It does insane damage. So there are a couple problems with it. Again, playing the spec itself being super punishing, not a problem in and of itself, but some of the ways that it is punishing don't make sense. Collapsing star, if your cast is cancelled, whether you cancel it yourself by hitting escape, or you step too early, or you get hit by a minor knockback or any form of cast stop, Literally, a micro knockback that bumps you back a yard will cancel your collapsing star. This causes you to lose all 30 souls that you build up to cast it. You go from 30 to 0. It doesn't matter how it gets canceled. If it gets canceled, you lose all the souls. While I understand that there is a reason that this is in place, and that reason would be because when you're casting Collapsing Star, your Fury Drain, it doesn't halt, but it slows down incredibly slow. And it also stops the scaling of how fast your Fury rate is draining. So if this wasn't the case, and you could just keep recasting it, then you could sit there spam casting it when a boss is immune or something like that to keep your Void meta going, which is unhealthy and unintuitive gameplay in and of itself. But there are ways around this. It doesn't need to take away all 30 souls. I would like to see this change to, if it's cancelled, you drop down to 25 souls or 5 less than the cast. The reason I say 5 less than the cast is the next point that I'm going to get into. But I would like to see a change on that because that feels absolutely awful. Also, in terms of PvP, I have no idea how the spec would literally function considering this, but I'm not going to speak on PvP beyond that one note. Next, I'd like to see Collapsing Star changed. Instead of being a flat 30 souls per cast, I'd like to see it start out at 20 and increase by 5 per cast. Again, it does have that scaling damage increase per cast, and what I would like to see specifically is going from a flat 30, 60, 90, 120, and 150. I don't think you can get 5 Collapsing Stars right now. I think 4 is really the upper limit. But see that changed from that number down to something closer to 20 to 45 to 75, which is plus 25, then plus 30, 110, and then 150. So at least by the 5th cast, we're looking at the same number of souls. So that's still the same unattainable amount that you're really not going to get. Unless maybe we have something that gives you a massive haste buff in a burn window where you have over 100% haste. Then I could see it. And what this would do is it will make it feel a lot easier to get that initial collapsing star out. This is a spec that is going to be a large struggle for casuals to play with the current design, and I'm not particularly a fan of. As well as that, I've seen a lot of complaints that it's not fun on beta so far because we haven't had real content to do. A lot of people are doing stuff in open world, and that means you're pretty much pressing consume to kill mobs, and before you ever build up to a collapsing star, you've killed everything you've pulled, or you died. It's one or the other. It takes a long time to build up the full 30 souls, and it's something that while it works on like a boss, or fighting something that lives for a long time on a dummies, sure, it feels fine. I don't think this converts as well to actual gameplay. And I think changing the collapsing stars to make the first one and second one be significantly easier to get, and then they get progressively harder and more difficult from there, will make it feel like it has a much easier learning curve where you can get those first 2 collapsing stars without much issue. The only problem that I do have with this is obviously this incentivizes the shorter Void Metamorphosis that drains faster because you're going to pretty consistently be able to just get 2 collapsing stars and then drop out of it. But I'll get to that in a second as well. Now, I would like to see some changes. I have some fake numbers for now, but around Void Metamorphosis in general, and the talents Emptiness and Soul Glutton. That's namely the increased haste when you're in Metamorphosis per soul you generate and consume, versus the less souls to enter Void Metamorphosis and drains faster. So, considering what I just said, this is depending on if other changes happen. If it were the case that they changed how Collapsing Star worked, then the numbers and how I feel about these talents would also be different. But looking at it right now, I would like to see Void Metamorphosis get a baseline amount of haste that it gives you. In general, I think entering Void Metamorphosis is something that should just feel good right away. And having it directly impact your gameplay by giving you a flat amount of haste is a great way to do that, where as soon as you enter Void Metamorphosis, the spec will feel that much better to play. In turn, Emptiness would have to be nerfed down a bit. I don't think it should ramp up 100 souls. I think it would be a bit better if this was tuned down a bit. Keep it at the 0.25 per soul, but cap it at 20%. So you'd go from the current 25% at max stacks to about 30% with this change. Except you'd also be getting that 10% haste as Soul Glutton, where Void Metamorphosis doesn't currently feel any faster, it would be getting that haste. I do have a note in here for, again, reducing the Fury Drain, as it feels too punishing, but if they were to make changes to Collapsing Star, this wouldn't necessarily be the case. Just a bunch of different ideas that I have around it. So with this, it would increasing the amount of haste that you have in Void Meta will lower the value of more haste, not by a significant amount, but it would lower the value of more haste and increase the value of your other stats. That being done in tandem with nerfing your mastery, because you're already going to be stronger in Void Metamorphosis from that bonus default haste, means your mastery doesn't need to be tuned as strongly towards being in Void Metamorphosis. So that could be brought down significantly, bringing mastery a lot more in line to other stats. Again, we could reduce this number from where it's currently about 175% bonus in Void Meta. You could bring that down to 100% or even 75%, and this is still going to be more than twice as good as Critical Strike Versatility. There's a lot of room to play with here, but that could be brought down while Void Meta will feel better on its own regard without needing specifically to be stacking Mastery, while also that will in turn lower the value of haste, as being a Void Metamorphosis more often won't have that inherent value. So those are my thoughts around Collapsing Star, Void Meta, and everything in general, because the haste and mastery scaling is higher than any other stat I've seen for any class in this game ever. Again, except for the gap was this big for mastery on Augvoker before it got so many different reworks to fix the issues it had. But it wasn't that the mastery scaled incredibly well on Evoker, it was that it didn't scale off its other three stats at all, and mastery was the only one that buffed your allies enough to matter. So this is a case where the spec would scale insanely well compared to other classes, but you could only equip gear that was haste mastery. You literally might be looking at dropping 30 to 40 item levels for a piece if it didn't have haste or mastery on it. If it was like haste verse, you're probably going to drop 40 item levels and not wear it. And I think that's just a large issue in modern World of Warcraft. That's something they very clearly have wanted to avoid. And while I think it's okay to have two stats be very far ahead, I don't think it's okay to have them be this far ahead. Now, getting out of the main core of the class, I have a bunch of more minor issues. These things are just not as important, but they are important. So I would like to see Vengeful Retreat gets a self-lockout of 0.5 seconds. And what I mean by that is, when you Vengeful Retreat, you can't cast again for 0.5 of a second. This is something that actually will matter for Havoc as well, because we have double Vengeful in the Eldrachi Reaver tree, and it's a little weird to use. The only time we've ever run it, though, was for some cheese on Mugsy. But the problem with it is this. When you go to a dummy, and you Voidblade in, and you Hungering Slash, it gives you a free Vengeful Retreat. So when I press it, I still have Vengeful. And I'm still very clearly within range, and I can still hit mobs. So that is perfectly fine. And that's not what I have a problem with. What I have a problem with is the fact that if I do that, and I am pressing my Vengeful button more than a single time, it will double cast, and it will send you launching absolutely very far away. So just for frame of reference of what that looks like, again, I landed about here from my original Vengeful. If I Void Blade, Hungering Slash, and then I Vengeful, and it double casts, I'm out of range of the mobs. I'm all the way fucking back here. And this is something that'll happen a lot when you start playing Devourer, and you need to be really careful about, and I just don't think it should be something that you have to think about or be careful about. I don't think it should let you double press a movement button and absolutely send you. So, minor, but it is a gripe that I do have. I think Vengeful Retreat should get that self-lockout. My second problem is that you are forced to pass or pay through Bouncing Glaives to access the CC portion of your tree, including your Mastery move speed. All it does is throw Glaive ricochets to an additional target, and it's like, okay, whatever, you have a dead talent point, right? Who doesn't have that? Throw Glaive, for reference, does 200 damage, whereas Consume, which has similar range, can be cast while moving, and generates Fury and a Soul Fragment, does about 35 times as much damage. Also, weird to me that they made a cool animation for throwing Glaives, where you throw a Scythe for something that is entirely unused on the spec. But I'll get to that later. So, I just don't like that node is still there for Devourer, and it's a talent that you don't have to take, but in a lot of situations, you will definitely take, and it does nothing. In that same vein, let me move this one up as they're actually side by side. On the opposite side of the tree, you have Charred Warblades, which heals you for fire damage. Devourer has exactly 0 fire damage, except for self-fire damage on soul immolation. So the only way to proc Charred Warblades, it does not proc off any of your cosmic damage. You'll see nothing happening in here. But when I press soul immolation, you heal 3% of the damage you're dealing to yourself. I don't know what to make of it, just a funny interaction, but again, this seems like a case of change this talent because this literally can't heal you as Devourer. So you have 2 talents on both sides where you are forced to pass through them to get enough talents to even go down the tree, and you have to take a dead talent point at least, if not both. Typically, you're going to take both dead talent points. So yeah, want to see something change with that. I don't know if you want to make Charred Warblades work for Devourer in some way, or just replace it with something else. I don't know. But right now, it feels very bizarre that is there and works that way. Next is Imprison. So Imprison only has a 20-yard range, which is noteworthy because you could see I don't have a target where I can imprison them there, but it's a 20-yard range. Your regular casting abilities are 25 yards, which means you're not even able to cast Imprison on a mob unless the tooltip is wrong. You're not able to cast your Imprison on a mob that is within your range and at the range that you're typically going to be playing at. Seems like a weird oversight. Even our Interrupt is 30 yards range when you have improved Disrupt. Because of Guile, Consume Magic is actually a 50-yard range, but Imprison is still only 20 yards. Seems a bit weird. Feel like this should at least match the range of your abilities. Could cause problems if you're planning to use that as a stop or CC, and then you simply don't realize that you're not in range to cast Imprison because it doesn't match your range. So, seeing that change for Devourer would be kind of nice. And that said, I think that Devourer should not have access to Disrupt as a range spec. So, they have a 25-yard with Guile, or with improved Disrupt, a 30-yard range kick. It also gives a significant amount of Fury, which is actually very relevant for Devourer. But it's a 15-second cooldown, just like a melee spec. And after they just kind of did a pruning to all this kind of, all the things that seem to shorten cooldowns for interrupts, it seems like Devourer is kind of slipping through the cracks here, where it has a melee interrupt cooldown on a full ranged range. And I, again, don't really think that should be the case. This one's not particularly big, but it is oddly added benefit for just them compared to every other range spec in the game, which does not have a 15-second interrupt. So yeah, not sure about that one, but want to make a note of it. Coming over to the Devourer tree, there is this talent here, Focused Ray. And this works kind of a lot like Isolated Prey does for Havoc Demon Hunter, where your Void Ray deals 50% more damage when you damage a single target. However, the problem is it was put in a slot where it's gating you down the tree. This is a very high value position that actually locks you off of these 4 talent points here. And I have no idea why Focus Ray was put in this position when Void Glare Boon is right here below it, and Rolling Torment is also right here, and either of these could be swapped around. If you swap Focus Ray with either Void Glare or Rolling Torment, it's a more viable talent point in situations that will actually always help you, as opposed to something that only works in pure single target. So either I think Focus Ray should be swapped probably with Void Glare Boon, so that you get the 10 extra Fury after channeling in this node here, and then if you want to pay around Focus Ray, you could go through Rolling Torment if you're looking at AoE scenarios, rather than having this 50% bonus single target only damage in AoE. Alternatively, there is the other way that you could go about this, which is take Focus Ray, and instead of being 50% bonus damage when Void Ray damages a single target, instead make it deal 50% bonus damage to your main target. This is how IBM used to work way back for Havoc Demon Hunter. We know that it can work that way, and it probably would not be particularly difficult to have be coded or added to the game. So I think that might be the best way to go about it, because these pure single target talents feel like absolute ass as a Havoc DH. And both when we got it for Felsguard and now as we still have for Isolated Prey, I particularly hate it as a talent. So I'd like to see it change to main target takes 50% bonus damage. If not, please at least change the positioning so you can go around it. You don't have to go through it in situations where it literally doesn't work. And lastly, it comes to Soul Immolation. Currently, I'm talented into the actual active version of Soul Immolation. What Soul Immolation does is it lights you on fire and does a little bit of damage to yourself. It's not much. For reference, it's about 3% of my health bar, and that gets DR'd and things as well. As mentioned, you also heal 3% of it from Charred Warblades, as it is self-fire damage. Um, and then you also shatter off 3 souls. Those 3 souls are about equivalent in healing to the amount of damage that you're dealing, because souls heal you for 1% of your HP, plus you have an extra 10% for Shattered Restoration. So they're about, in this case, 6 or 1.6k health each. So you're going to heal back about the same amount that it deals to you. Generates 36 Fury over 5 seconds and 3 Soul Fragments. Nothing extreme going on here. And then you have the choice of either having active Soul Immolation on a 2-charge system with 30-second cooldown, or you can have it so every time you cast a spell, you have a 5% chance for Soul Immolation to activate itself. In every situation currently, you run Spontaneous Immolation. It's just better. The more haste that you get, the more procs that you're going to get as well, because you're simply casting more. But it's the reason it's better isn't because you get more Soul Immolation uptime. It's better because you don't have to waste a GCD casting Soul Immolation. This is a very weak global. Again, you're pressing Soul Immolation to deal a little bit of self-damage, generate 3 souls, and 36 Fury. But in turn, you're not able to cast Consume. Consume does damage to the mob, an extra outside of Void Meta, 6,500, plus it generates 10 Fury and a Soul Fragment. And because it's dealing damage to an enemy, you also have a 12% chance to generate a soul. So there's added value there as well. But basically, that GCD that it costs you to use Soul Immolation takes away about a third of the value of the button itself, which means you would need to get access to way more Soul Immolations and have the GCD be a lot better for it to ever be worth playing an active version. So there's a couple ways to fix this. Um, the option I would like to see is taking Soul Immolation off of the GCD. This feels like a button that would be perfectly fine being off GCD and something that you could just press during your global. Maybe not while you're in an active cast, but if you press Reap, you can press Soul Immolation at the same time and go flawlessly into your next global. It would probably make the class feel like there's a bit more going on as well, which would fix one of my main problems, which is Devourer just doesn't quite feel like it has enough going on. So this would give you an off GCD button to add into the rotation, and specifically, you'd be playing around that 2-charge system and using Soul Immolation when it actively benefits you the most during and around your Void Metamorphosis. But currently, you don't want to spend that global casting that in Void Meta. So you always go for the passive version, you're basing everything off of RNG swings, and it's not that impactful. The second option is to buff Soul Immolation pretty significantly and make it actually feel like a real globe worth pressing. I think, as I mentioned, that it already feels like Devourer doesn't have quite enough going on, and it would probably feel really good to either have this be an off GCD button or at least a half-second global, just like Fellblade is for Havoc, and that would kind of fill out the rotation to, if you're playing active Soul Immolation, have a little bit more going on while you're able to still go into passive Soul Immolation and make the spec a little bit easier if you so choose. But currently, it's no contest. You always go for the passive one, which isn't particularly a problem, but the reasons why are a little bit weird. So let me know what you guys think. That's about all my thoughts on Devourer for now. As I mentioned, I do think the spec feels a little too simple at the moment. Like there's not quite enough going on. Once you play around with it and get used to it, it doesn't really change ever. It feels like it could really benefit from having like one form of a proc or something added to it. That's kind of where I think soul immolation could be good as something off GCD or on a very short GCD if it were to add that as an actual button that you actively wanted to play around, and then have the passive option be tuned pretty similar in value. But that's just my opinion. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate that, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.